Macca's guides.
Hey guys, Macca here. Welcome to the Overwatch how-to series where I take you through a character, my opinions on how and when you should use them, their strengths, their weaknesses, and their achievements and trophies. In today's video, we are taking a look at Pharah, in my opinion, one of the most versatile and deadly heroes available in the game, as long as you have the skill and knowledge to use her. Available at your disposal are her hover, which is a passive jump ability that allows her to maintain a little bit of height above the ground. Additionally, as her weapon, she has the rocket launcher, and then for her abilities, she has a jump jet and concussive blast, as well as a barrage for her ultimate. Additionally, for her legendary skins, she has the Thunderbird, Security Chief, Mecha Queen, Raptorion, and Rain Dancer. Now that we have a little bit of a general idea of what Pharah can do, let's get into some specifics. So the first thing you'll want to know is that Pharah has a passive ability known as Hover. This is similar to Hanzo's Wall Run, as well as other characters' abilities that are basically more or less their jump. In her case, Pharah's jump is a hover. She has a jetpack on her back that allows her to maintain altitude in the air and even gain altitude a little bit. Obviously, you can't infinitely spam this, as you will run out of jet fuel and slowly descend to the ground if you're in the air. For your primary weapon, and basically the only way you can really deal any significant damage, you have your rocket launcher with 6 ammo that fires about 1 rocket per second, doing 120 damage on direct hits, and also a little bit of splash damage if you don't hit them. For her abilities, she has her jump jet, which is easily her most useful thing. This basically just propels you into the air using her rocket thrusters and allows you to get serious height instantly. The cooldown on this is 10 seconds, and you should be able to cruise at a decent altitude using your hover ability after using your jump jet, in order to be able to basically use the jump jet as soon as you touch the ground yet again, letting you basically be in the air at all times if you so desire. Her other ability is called the Concussive Blast, where she uses her wrist to launch a small rocket that knocks enemies back based on where it hits. This is extremely useful for pushing enemies back or off ledges if they are close to one, and there's even an achievement related to doing so. This one has a cooldown of 12 seconds. Last but not least, we have her barrage, which unloads 30 total rockets in about 3 seconds, each rocket doing about 50 damage, meaning that you should be able to do about 1,000 damage, so just about any enemy is vulnerable to being killed. It should also be noted that while you're using barrage, Pharah will maintain her exact position in the air, so if you're at the height of your jump, you won't lose any altitude while doing it. Although you can also do it from the ground, that's probably not recommended. So now that we know a little bit more about what she can do, let's talk about when and how we should use her. And in my opinion, she is an overall good character for all game modes, including offense and defense and neutral points. She should be played slightly differently depending on what position you're playing. If you're on attack, you should be trying to get enemy snipers out of the way and scan for turrets so that your team knows where to look. If you're playing on defense, you should probably get behind the defense, take out the tanks, and also try to give your teammates some information about the enemy location. Don't forget that with Pharah, you should almost always try to be airborne, making sure you use your rockets to do splash damage, and using your concussive blast to knock enemies around, especially if they're healing each other with Mercy or Lucio. She can also be very effective from the ground though, so don't be afraid to land behind some of your enemies and take them on from behind using your rockets on foot. So let's talk a little bit about her strengths and weaknesses. There are a lot of different things here to be said for her, but keep in mind that I think one of her strengths is that she is the most versatile hero in the game. She can do it all, in my opinion. She has very few counters, and she's very useful against a lot of different heroes in a lot of different scenarios. Mainly that's due to her verticality and being able to get really high up, higher than basically any enemy, instantly. She also does high amounts of damage with her rocket, and there's a little bit of splashback from them, so you can damage multiple enemies at the same time. You can knock them back using the Concussive Blast, and Pharah can use all of the map. That means there's no such thing as barriers or walls. Feel free to fly over them. Every window, ledge, and shortcut you can see, you can use with Pharah. Also, her barrage very well complements some of your teammates' ultimates like Zarya and Mei. She does, however, have some weaknesses in my opinion, and that is that she has a lower health of 200. She can cause herself damage, which will happen frequently when you're first learning her, and she doesn't have the ability to heal herself. She does only really have one offensive weapon that can deal damage, again, other than her ultimate, and realizing that her Concussive Blast isn't useful in most situations for actually knocking enemies off of the level. I also think she's very skill dependent, and how well you play is a big indicator of how well you will do, especially your control scheme. If you are playing with a controller, you should definitely be hovering with the left trigger and not the A button. You should also consider that hovering in an open area makes her a decently easy target for a lot of enemies to aim at, so that's something you definitely want to watch out for, especially for long-range characters and turrets that can take you down quite rapidly. You'll find Pharah most useful against enemies that are very short range, like Reaper, McCree, and Tracer. Enemies who don't have the ability to directly fire at you, like Junkrat. Also, Reinhardt, because you can get above him and his shield becomes somewhat useless. Also, enemies like Mercy are extremely susceptible to Pharah's attacks because you can separate her from the group, not allowing her to heal the group, and then easily take her out using your rockets. So this is definitely a Mercy killer in my opinion. With that being said, I don't think she is the strongest against turrets like Bastion and Torbjorn. Also, if you're uncareful with snipers, Widowmaker and Hanzo will easily take her out. Soldier 76 tends to have success against Pharah, and any enemy indoors is basically safe from her attacks. You want to keep in mind that Pharah is a strictly outdoor, high ceilings type of character. You don't want to be running through streets, narrow hallways, or sewers with her. You definitely want to be above the battlefield in a large open area and try to stay out of confined spaces like rooms. If your team's getting completely dominated by a Pharah, honestly your best bet is just to try to use the environment to your advantage. Pharah's also extremely useful for crowd control. Like I've mentioned, feel free to separate a crowd using Concussive Blast and use your rockets to get direct hits on certain enemies while causing splash damage on others. As soon as you get noticed, try to duck behind safety behind a building or a structure and then get back into the battle and repeat. She's really good at disrupting enemy setups, so keep in mind you'll probably want to be communicating with your team a lot while using her to get the most out of her. Also, it's never a bad idea to save your barrage for a payload when there's multiple enemies on top of it, as usually you'll end up extremely successful. Her ultimate does leave her a little bit vulnerable because she becomes airborne and completely still for over 3 seconds, which means she becomes an easy target, but as long as you're behind the enemies and shooting down on them, they'll have a hard time getting you out of the sky. I've also noticed that Pharah is definitely best used when the enemy is caught off guard. If the enemy is starting to change their strategy to take down you as a Pharah, I would highly recommend switching to a different hero for a couple minutes and cycling back to her when they're no longer paying attention. As for all heroes, we do have 2 achievements and trophies that we can attain with Pharah, the first one being for using one of her abilities called Clearing the Area, which is for knocking an enemy to their death using Pharah's Concussive Blast in quick or competitive play. In my opinion, this one's actually pretty easy and was one of the first achievements I got in this game. You want to take note that not a lot of maps actually have a place that you can throw enemies off, so you want to focus on the control maps. These include Greece, China, and Nepal. All 3 of these maps have great areas for knocking off enemies, and a lot of the times they are nearest the control points, which are always going to be heavily populated. What I recommend doing to get this is finding out where the enemies are coming from, finding them in a choke point that does have some kind of a boundary they can be thrown off, getting up into the sky and waiting for them to cross that area, and then knocking them off either left, right, behind, or forward to get them completely off the map. Most characters will be completely defenseless as they're falling down, unless you get a Tracer who can rewind, or if you're really unlucky, a Diva who's really good and can actually shoot herself back out. For our second achievement or trophy, we have Death from Above, which is for killing 4 enemies in a row without touching the ground as Pharah in quick or competitive play. Now, more or less, the only way to do this is by getting a decent amount of kills, probably at least 2 or 3 using the barrage, and then mopping up a couple extras. There are a couple of very important notes that I want to make that will help you tremendously. The first note is always focus on the payload. You'll want to play on defense while the enemy is on offense on the payload, and watch out for the enemies to be all on the payload, indicated by the number on the top of the screen. As soon as that happens, it's your perfect opportunity to strike, get behind them, and try to take out as many as possible. Additionally, what you'll want to know is that if you use the jump jet from a high point, you'll actually be able to hover and then use the jump jet a second time before touching the ground, as long as you're floating towards a place that is lower in altitude than from where you started. That's right, you can definitely use jump jet twice in the same jump if you're careful and plan it and start from a really high point in the map. After your first jump and barrage, keep in mind that if you don't have your 4 kills, just keep waiting up in the sky trying to get a couple of hit markers with your rockets. Also, if you're really struggling and have a friend, I highly recommend that your friend plays as either Zarya or Mei. Use Zarya's Gravitron as shown in the video to group all of the enemies together in one area, or Mei's ultimate, which actually freezes all of the enemies and makes them very easy targets. Again, causing the damage with the barrage is not really the problem. It's being accurate on the enemies and actually hitting multiple enemies at the same time that becomes the biggest issue. Freezing them or grouping them together completely avoids this problem. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully the video was helpful. Make sure you comment, like, and subscribe. Share with a friend if you so desire. Special shout out to The Gigs as well as DocCupcake84 for supporting the show on Patreon. And hopefully I see you guys next time. Peace.